Morning, Real Talkers, or good afternoon, depending on when you're downloading or pressing play on the show. It's Jesperson here with Hoyles and Brooks on this September 22nd. Today's episode is presented by the amazing team at Bitcoin Well. They're headquartered out of Edmonton, Bitcoin ATMs across the country, and they're publicly traded, as a matter of fact. Now, I don't tell you to buy Bitcoin. I don't tell you to sell your house or cash in your RSPs and invest in cryptocurrency. I would never tell you how to invest your money. And if I did tell you how to invest your money, the worst thing you could possibly do would be to listen to me and do what I say. But what I do tell you to do is, if you have questions about investing, putting your savings into Bitcoin or Ethereum or something else, if you're not quite sure how it works and you want to go to a reputable source, I endorse the source at Bitcoin Well. You can find them at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
It's a big day coming up if you're paying attention to politics in Western Canada. Huge day for politics in Saskatchewan, and we'll be covering it nonstop from top to tail on today's show. No, okay, but it is a big day in Alberta. And Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, yesterday after a small but maybe significant cabinet shuffle, and you'll say, well, what do you mean by significant, Jespo? What does significant mean? How do you define significant? Well, that's the point of some of our conversations today, including in about 70 minutes from now, just over an hour from now, we'll talk to one of my favorite writers, political writers in Canada. Jason Markusoff does an amazing job as the Alberta correspondent for Maclean's magazine, the award-winning feature writer, columnist, regular on CBC's Power and Politics, will be joining us to talk about Tyler Shandro moving out of health in Alberta, with former Labor and Immigration Minister Jason Copping moving in. It was just a switcheroo. The two of them switched positions. Did Tyler Shandro really step down? Did he really resign the role? I'm curious to know what you make of it, Real Talkers. You can let us know on Twitter at RealTalkRJ. You can use that hashtag too. And of course, on our live chat, you can send us an email like Michael did. Nothing to do with the cabinet shuffle, but I want to get to his email in just a second. We always appreciate audience feedback and want to get to as many of those pieces as we can. But did Shandro step down, or was he shuffled out of health? And more importantly, or more significantly, what does it mean for Alberta's Premier? There's a big caucus meeting today, this afternoon. And depending on who you talk to, Jason Kenney will either defiantly tell members of his caucus, you're either with me or out the door. He'll maybe threaten to take the party down with him and call a snap election, or the party's going to show the Premier the door. Or maybe none of that will happen. Maybe nothing whatsoever. People get all worked up. People start speculating and wondering what's coming up. And the fact of the matter is, we don't know. But of course, we and you and millions of others across the country, quite frankly, will be keeping a keen eye on this development. Of course, I don't have to tell you, this is just a couple of days out from the federal election. A federal election that has implications across the country for different premiers, in particular conservative premiers that now know that they will continue to work with a liberal minority government. Now, that's good news for Jason Kenney in the sense that it gives him that punching bag. It gives him that target, which is the PMO. Justin Trudeau's still there. I mean, what was Jason Kenney's plan? What was Jason Kenney going to do if it was Aaron O'Toole that won? If the Conservatives were to form government? Poof, there goes his target, right? There goes the subject or the target of his ire. There goes that punching bag. Who's he going to swing at if it's Aaron O'Toole? Who's he going to blame? So it's Justin Trudeau. Yesterday, Minister Rick McIver, one of the senior cabinet ministers and one rumored to be someone who could step in on an interim leadership basis if that type of scenario was called for. Rick McIver sending a letter yesterday to the federal government. You've probably heard this. So this is the day after the federal election, and the province of Alberta asking Ottawa for help transporting critically ill patients out of the province for care and bringing in ICU staff, RNs, and RTs, registered nurses, respiratory therapists. Rick McIver is the Minister of Municipal Affairs in Alberta, and he made the request to Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness Minister Bill Blair, of course, Toronto's former police chief, on Tuesday, that was yesterday, requesting an immediate meeting. Now, immediately people started wondering, why on earth is Rick McIver sending this email now, this letter now? Why didn't he send it days ago when Albertans could have used that extra help? McIver says, hey, listen, and part of it's believable and part of it's not. He says, but there was a federal election going on. I didn't know who the minister was going to be. I didn't know who to address the letter to. He said, this came across my desk, said Rick McIver yesterday to reporters, and I sent that letter off in less than a day. Which is like, that's a pretty good job, pal. Like, honestly, hang on a second. For those of you that are watching on YouTube right now, I'll try to paint a picture for those that are listening on the podcast. But for those of you that are tuning on, like, this is my to-do list just for today. This is just for today, and I'm super stressed. You can see I ran out of room on the page, and I had to add a Post-it note to add more. All the yellow stuff's about our golf tournament coming up next Thursday, June 23rd, by the way. Tickets not yet available, but you can indicate your interest by sending us a quick email to golf@ryanjesperson.com. So this is my to-do. So I can't imagine what Minister Rick McIver's to-do list looks like. I mean, we're just one of Canada's top-rated podcasts. We're not a government ministry. So the fact that if he did start thinking about that letter or realize that Alberta needed some assistance and get that letter off within a day, I'd like to applaud Rick McIver because I don't act that quickly. Just ask the team. But what's not funny is that Alberta's in trouble. And you've known that for a while. And as Alberta's now reaching out to other provinces, including Quebec and Ontario, Alberta's made an appeal to BC. Alberta's now relying on the federal government for help. I'm curious to know how all of this is going to ultimately work and factor into the support that Alberta's premier sees or does not see. What are some of the big things, talking point-wise, that we've heard from Jason Kenney over the last year? Alberta's not getting a fair shake from Ottawa. Ottawa hates Alberta. Why does Ottawa continue to punch down at Alberta? Why does Alberta get victimized time after time by the Trudeau Liberals who have always hated Alberta? Now the trend? Please help us. We have mismanaged this to the degree that we have reached our capacity to handle it, and that's certainly not a swipe at healthcare workers. We're going to talk to one in just a second, an OBGYN that moved into the ICU and then went to Twitter to get enough equipment to be able to do her job. This is not a swipe at the healthcare workers, but the way that this has been managed means that Alberta is now on an island in the sense that the entire country is paying attention to Alberta's plea for help from other provinces and from Ottawa. So it's perhaps not a surprise to see Alberta's premier facing threats to his leadership, to the confidence that his caucus and cabinet, let alone Albertans, have in him. The question is what happens this afternoon. Now, if I was a betting man, I would never bet on Alberta politics because you'd lose every single time. I mean, you know who wins betting on Alberta politics are the people that come up with the wildest ideas, the things that would never happen in some sort of a normal scenario, because Alberta's political landscape has been nothing close to normal for the last 6 years and maybe longer than that. But I don't think Jason Kenney's resigning today. I don't think that there's any way in hell that this guy resigns today. And I also don't think that the opposition wants him to resign. I think that Rachel Notley and the NDP wants Jason Kenney to stay on because I'll tell you what, with about 18 months to go, approximately, we'll see. I mean, you know, it's up to premiers and political parties. They have ballparks within when they can call an election. So we don't know exactly when it is. It's not a fixed date in 2023. But if I'm the official opposition and I'm paying attention to what's going on right now with this government, I don't want this government to reorganize itself and introduce a new leader and essentially, I don't mean technically rebrand itself, but reintroduce itself to the electorate. That was then, this is now. The equivalent of a restaurant that's had somewhat of a sketchy reputation, putting up a under new management sign. You know what that does, right? You go, well, last time I was there, you say that they always had fantastic shepherd's pie for so many years, but last time I was there were fruit flies everywhere. I mean, the place, how the mighty have fallen, it was my favorite place. And so you don't go there for a while, and then you see under new management. And what do? You're inclined to maybe give them a shot again. Even though there was like no hand soap in the washroom and the fruit flies were there and there were fingerprints on the blade of the steak knife and you just looked, they were all, and the server brought the cups over by holding them from the top, like everything was wrong last time you were there. But it's under new management now. And you think back to the days of when you used to go there on Sundays after church with your family and you just want to give them another shot and you want to try again. So, can the United Conservative Party under new management, so to speak, earn back the trust of the more than 1 million people that voted for that party back in 2019? We shall see. We're keeping a keen eye on the story, of course, and that's one that will, if everything goes sideways today, you better believe we're going to have a barn burner of a show tomorrow. Great show tomorrow regardless. Are we talking about EVs tomorrow? I'm excited about this. And I don't want to spoil, but we have one of our, like a very young audience member that submitted a video to us, correct? We're going to be integrating a video question tomorrow into this interview.
You bet. Yeah. The guy from BBC, the Top Gear magazine TV show, he's going to be on the show. He's my nephew's fave guy, who's a writer who does basically looks at technology, future proof. So you can tell I'm not a car guy.
Well, we're gonna learn. That's the whole point. You are a car person. Don't even try it.
I'm not a car guy.
You know what? I was laughing with Carrie, with my wife, the other day, and I was like, I don't think Hoyles likes it when I talk about her car on the show. Is it true? Is it? Can we be honest? Can we have a moment? Can we pretend like thousands of people aren't going to hear this? Can I just ask you for a second? Do you not prefer as much when we talk about? Because I always point out, I go, you've got an EV, you've got an electric vehicle, and you always kind of go. Rrr.
Well, I feel like it doesn't. My street cred goes down a little bit.
Why? Because it's an EV or because of the make? The make of the model.
Oh, no. Here we go.
I've just been waiting to tell everybody that Sarah Hoyles drives a BMW.
Listen, it was a used BMW.
Uh-huh.
And, okay, so to answer your question.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
No, the idea, my nephew is the one that put me onto this whole idea of EVs versus a synthetic fuel. And I was just like, no, I don't want fuels. That's not a good idea. And he was like, well, EVs, when you look at the battery and how they have to mine for it. So it's kind of like, maybe it's just me greenwashing my vehicle.
Ah, I see.
So I'm conflicted. I mean, sometimes people, comment on my love of the NBA and how I was critical of the Olympics. And I'm like, yeah, hypocrisy.
Yeah, we're all hypocrites.
Yeah.
Everyone is a hypocrite.
I got to make choices.
Everyone's a hypocrite. You look like you haven't thought on this. I love when people come through the parking lot of our studio, the location of which we keep private. I always love, people are always like, whose is that? It's like I'm like, that's Hoyle's car. And I was like, that's Hoyle's car? Really?
How much are you paying her?
How much are you paying her? And I say a lot. A lot. Do you have a thought on the whole, before we go into, this is tomorrow, by the way, we're just letting you know what's coming up on the show tomorrow, this conversation about EVs. It's a fascinating one, and ultimately, this is something that you've put on our radar, Sarah, because I've heard a lot of objections, or at least cautionary conversations around the batteries and the environmental impacts of EVs, and that's not, it is his thing. It's worthwhile of our conversation, but stacking it up in a conversation around synthetic fuels, that's not a conversation I've been privy to before, so I'm excited to hear about it. Sam, I think most people that pay attention to the show know that you're an engineer by trade, and your brain works in these ways that you understand a lot of things at sort of a bit of a higher level, especially when it comes to tech. Has that debate been on your radar?
It has, and it's one of those debates. First of all, when I roll into the parking lot and I see Hoyles' car charging in the parking lot, I'm just like, that's right, Hoyles is from the future. That's the future.
You
right
are from
there.
Because you're not
that
even
is the future,
and it's free. That's the part. It's
somebody's
free.
got to pay for it. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's free for you.
Yeah,
and it's free for me. It doesn't bother me. I'm surprised nobody said anything.
Yeah,
but yeah, she is from the future in a way.
I'm actually curious, Sarah. I've noticed out in the wild, I'll come into a parking lot of like a strip mall or something like that, and there will be plugs that say on them, block heaters only, no charging. Have you encountered that?
The nerve!
Yeah.
These people.
I would just rip that out and I'd just...
You know what? I'm not trying to give anybody any ideas, but same sort of a thing. When I show up, because you're always here first, you deserve that credit. You get the golden ribbon today, Sarah. I'm surprised that nobody steals your charger. I'd be concerned about that. Because it's just plugged into the wall, right? There's no locking mechanism.
It actually does lock on my car. But yeah, someone could just be like, if they want to just be a jerk face, and we're like, you think you're going to charge here?
Yeah.
And then they and unplug it from the wall.
Yeah. I'd be surprised. You know what you do is you just go like how they went old school, like back in the day, you know, when everybody was stealing the Mercedes-Benz logos, the ones that stood on the hood.
Yeah.
And then you'd hear about the odd maniac that would run a wire from their battery to the emblem. So if somebody put their hand on it to rip it off, just bam. I don't know if that's an old wives' tale or if that's actually true.
Can we bring back hood ornaments?
I agree.
They were great.
Remember back in the day,
cool
like
back then.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, Jaguar had the best one, I think, with that. You know,
well, with Rolls Royce, they actually have. Again, my nephew told me this. They actually have this ability that that drops down.
Yeah.
So people can't steal it.
So you can't steal it. So does your Rolls do that at home, or is it,
yeah,
I know you just drive you drive the Beamer to work when you're slumming it.
Yeah.
But your Rolls at home, it goes down when you park it.
That's right. Yeah.
Amazing technology. That's really amazing stuff.
Stop it.
We're going to be talking in just a few minutes with Dr. Stephanie Cooper. I've been sitting on that Beamer blast for like weeks. No, you know what? Hey, in all seriousness, I think I'm going to be really interested to see how quick the turnover is going to be when it becomes more and more and more mainstream for people to have to own an EV. You know, like back, because what was it, 3 years ago? If you saw a Tesla, it was like, wow, right? That's a Tesla. That now Teslas are cool, but you're like, yeah. I mean, if you're out and about, you know, in the city through the course of a day, you'll see 2 or 3 or 5 Teslas.
Absolutely. But the thing is, when you think about EVs versus synthetic fuel, is that the infrastructure, if you had synthetic fuel, could just stay the same. We could have gas stations or fuel stations. We could have like motor vehicles, and the actual internal combustion engine can stay the same. Well, this is what I'm hoping to find out tomorrow. What I'm under the impression of is that it stays the same. So we don't have to do any crossover. So maybe I shouldn't be doing EV.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you're the one that's really wurting the planet, Sarah. Why don't you sit and think about that for a second? You know what, though? You know what I love about the way that the show goes and the way that we've operated since inception is that tomorrow's not going to be the definitive conversation about it. It will increase our awareness on that angle of it, and then probably some smart person will send us an email and say, I appreciated that interview, but you guys didn't think about this. What about this? And then we'll go, you're right. And then we'll start, and we'll have these ongoing conversations like we have with curriculum and coal and a whole bunch of other things. On the live chat here, this is interesting. I mean, Haas makes a good point, and we've talked about this before, the debate I got in with my pal out of BC, and he's, as he should be, proud of a lot of the hydropower that they have out there, right? Haas says, you got to keep in mind that when it comes to Alberta's power generation, 91% of it, and Haas, I'll take you at your word for this. I've not fact-checked this, but Haas says 91% of power in Alberta comes from fossil fuels. At this rate, an electric vehicle in Alberta is really just a geographical change to where the pollution goes, which is a fair point. It's a really good point. If you're, using coal to generate the electricity that's charging the EV, really, when it comes to emissions, have you accomplished anything? Some of you are probably banging your head on the table right now, being like, oh my gosh, these guys don't know what they're talking about. If that is the case, as rare as that scenario may be, you can always send us an email to talk@ryanjesperson.com. I suspect, because Dr. Stephanie Cooper's not yet joined us, that the plausible scenario is that she's, in the ICU looking after people. And this comes with the territory right now. It's a really, really tough row to hoe for ICU docs, nurses, respiratory techs. I mean, in the ER as well. I mean, our paramedics, it right now. I mean, the numbers are wild. And so if Dr. Cooper joins us, great. And if not, we've got plenty of other things to talk about. I wanted to make a point, and this is something that I read that I thought was really interesting. Someone tweeting at Dr. Joe Vipond, who's been on the show before several times. Joe's the organizer of these Protect Our Province rallies, and you remember they started doing the media availabilities when Alberta's chief medical officer of health stopped doing them. Well, they're talking about ICU admissions, and a healthcare worker tweeting under the account Alberta Girl 5 said, I'm increasingly frustrated when we talk about numbers. For example, ICU admissions, including patients in the care of Dr. Stephanie Cooper. says this healthcare worker, I'm increasingly frustrated that ICU capacity numbers don't reflect the actual situation. I'm going, what do you mean? So I read on. She says today an increase of 4 ICU patients was recorded. So that, 222 in total. This is right around the most. It's hovering around the most that Alberta's seen in the last 18 months. Says so there's 222 in ICU, but in fact 42 new people were admitted. The number went up by 4, but 42 new people were admitted. It's just that 38 others either died or were discharged. She says, I need people to understand this. So it's not necessarily that it's just 222 people requiring ICU care. It's that some of them, in some circumstances, we're seeing more than 20 deaths a day still. More than 90% of people in ICUs unvaccinated right now. You know that. So the admissions are quite a bit higher than we might think. And I think that that's important for us to keep in mind. It's an important perspective to have when we're evaluating how the province is doing on this kind of stuff. We're going to be taking you out to Jasper as part of MyJasper Memories on this Wednesday. We'll talk to Jason Markusoff, as mentioned. And then we're a little bit later on in the show, in about an hour from now, we're going to take a look at the United Nations, artificial intelligence, and Facebook. It sounds kind of like a recipe for some dystopian disaster. Maybe it is.
Dr. Evil is in there for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. So we've got Amy Winecoff joining us, a data researcher at this. It's a post-secondary institution in the United States called Princeton. And Ryan Calo is going to join us, a law professor out of the University of Washington in Seattle. So that'll be a great conversation on the United Nations, AI, and Facebook. That's coming up. We're going to get to Michael's email in a little bit. We're going to take you into Premier Jason Kenney's media availability yesterday, but I want to remind you that today's program is presented in part by our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. They want to let you know that right now it's that time of year, fall, where they've got 2 Blizzard treats that are bound to please. The all-new pecan pie Blizzard treat, a crowd favorite with its crumbly brown sugar pieces and crunchy pecans. I found the middle ground there. Pecan. I kind of, kept everybody happy with that pronunciation. Atta boy.
If you watch the movie When Harry Met Sally, Billy Crystal is definitive. He says, pecan pie.
Is that kind of the... When Harry Met Sally is seen, I think, as an authority on a number of things.
Absolutely.
If people have an outburst in a restaurant, they go, yeah, she went all like When Harry Met Sally up in there, if you know what I mean.
So just reference Billy Crystal anytime you want to know how to pronounce pecan.
I love Billy Crystal. He's still alive, right?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. Yeah, if I told you about my cousin Carson, I want to have a Twitter account. Don't worry, Dairy Queen, we'll get back to you in a second. A Twitter account just called Dead or Alive, and we just release polls every day with just a celebrity's name on them, and then Dead or Alive. But you're not allowed to Google it, not allowed to ask Siri or Alexa. So we would say, for example, what's a good example? Well, this is obvious because he just put out a new movie. So I should, but like Clint Eastwood, Dead or Alive. That sounds like a movie, actually.
That actually sounds like a Clint Eastwood movie.
That sounds like an amazing movie. Clint Eastwood, Dead or Alive.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll be number 1. But everyone knows he's alive, so that would be a lousy question. But the ones that hang in the balance... Like the other day, I'm trying to remember, there was a celebrity that died last year that I kind of went, oh, yeah. Anyway, Carson.
Burt Reynolds? That was one of the, in a live chat.
Right.
The Chatterbox, people were like, Burt Reynolds is alive?
Yeah. So anyway,
Dead.
We'll let you know if we, I think you're supposed to say passed away. Yeah. What should we say, passed away or still here? It doesn't have the same ring to it, doesn't it? It has to be dead or alive. If we'd ever get off our asses and get that Twitter account going, we'll let you know so you can follow it. I'm sure it'll be a huge success. Meantime, the pumpkin pie Blizzard treat blends Dairy Queen's world-famous soft serve with real pumpkin pie pieces. Real pumpkin pie pieces garnished with whipped topping and nutmeg. You can find them at Palisades in Namao, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road. Our friends at Park Power reminding you can get your internet, electricity, and natural gas anywhere you want. You have choice in Alberta, so why not go to parkpower.ca, your friendly local utilities provider. You can compare rates on their website right there, electricity, natural gas, internet, or take a look at their utility bundles to find the rate that's right for you. And when you decide to make the switch, they'll do the dirty work for you. They break up with your soon-to-be ex so you don't have to have the awkward conversation. The promo code 2021-REAL TALK gets you $70 off your first bill.
Jillian has a great idea for your Twitter poll.
For dead or alive?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kenney's career.
Oh, dead. Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by career, right? Does she mean political career, for example? His career's never going to be dead.
No.
Like Ron Ambrose will get him a job in Washington, D.C. somewhere. He'll go to like the Woodrow Wilson Institute, or he'll get some great job. He'll sit on boards. You know, these politicians that wind up going and sitting on boards, I don't know if people really realize, like, the honorariums you can get paid to sit on corporate boards. If you can find 2 or 3 or 4 of those, you're laughing. Plus you got your pension, plus you got everything else. But with regards to Jason Kenney's political career in Alberta, or even Jason Kenney's political career in Canada, like federally speaking, I think you could. I mean, I'm going to say, I mean, he's a fighter for sure, and he's a he's a guy that has found ways to make things happen politically. You know, people will say he's a skilled campaigner. He's a great organizer. You know, he might say sort of a tactician, but you know, the more, you know, if you're being backed into a corner, the more hand grenades you throw and the more damage that you do, including collateral damage to try to stay alive, at the end of it, you look around and what does the landscape look like? You know, I'd be curious to see who steps up in support of Alberta's premier today, this caucus meeting, man, to be a fly on the wall in that room. Hey, you've got, you know, and I'm going to paint with big, wide swaths and broad brushes, and I'll use all the cliches to indicate that I recognize that some of these may be inaccurate, but generally speaking, you've got your rural MLAs, you've got your urban MLAs, you know, you've got one in Edmonton, you've got a whole bunch down in Calgary. They're all looking to preserve their political capital. They're looking to extend their political lives, and for the United Conservatives to hold government, because I think that there's a very real sense that next election the Conservatives could lose. I mean, this government, who would have guessed in April of 2019 when Jason Kenney rolled in that blue truck into the Big Four building and all the balloons fell? I was there. I mean, I can tell you there was energy in that room, major energy in that room. Who would have thought that government could be one and done? But if they don't do something, they will be. A new article by Don Braid, legendary columnist for Post Media out of the Calgary Herald. Don Braid has covered, gosh, I don't know how many governments, probably 9 premiers at least. He's like, thanks, Jesperson. You don't have to take it back. I'm like, Don Braid, since before they had computers, has been covering. No, but in all seriousness, I have tons of respect for Don, and he's a great voice. And he talked to former cabinet minister Leela Ahir, who said, quote, of the cabinet shuffle yesterday, Shandro and Copping, this is a failure of leadership from the premier. What does Leela here have to lose, right? She's already out of cabinet, persona non grata with Kenney. But I know there's a lot of people that are big fans of Leela here. The only thing, said Leela yesterday, that should have happened yesterday, is that the premier says he had failed and is stepping down. Shots fired. She says, we need to heal our province right now. That requires people who have failed in their leadership to step down and admit their mistakes. We need leadership that cares deeply about the human beings in this province. Don Braid asked her about moving Shandro out of health, and she said, it is an absolutely despicable move by Kenney to try to save himself, to try to shift the blame. This is not Rachel Notley talking. This is not Shannon Phillips from the NDP. This is Leela here. I mean, the VP of the United Conservative Party, not an elected official, but the VP of the party yesterday on the record saying the premier needs to step down.
Real talk.
That's real talk. I don't know how much further you go when you're premier, when you're leading that party, when you're losing the confidence to the point that people are speaking out publicly. Can I just tell you, I mean, you know, seeing Kerry Diot lose, seeing Jason Kenney coming up today, you know, knowing what's going to happen in Edmonton's mayoral election next month, it warms the cockles of the heart for people that have been dealing with the bullshit from these 3 guys for the last year and a half. I'm going to leave it at that for now, and we'll save the champagne for later. But for a lot of people, there have been politicians that have bullied their way into positions of power, trying to preserve their own political careers at the expense of stepping on people all over the place. And it's starting to catch up with a few of them. Let's get to what the premier had to say yesterday. In announcing that cabinet shuffle, we wanted to bring you a couple of the so-called highlights, including this. This is yesterday afternoon from Alberta's premier, Jason Kenney.
I have accepted Minister Shandro's resignation as Minister of Health. It is time for a fresh start and a new set of eyes on the largest department in the government, especially at a time such as this.
So I'm not sure about resignation, but that's fine. That's splitting hairs. You know, whether or not you're shuffled or whether or not you've resigned. If I'm Tyler Shandro, I wonder how that's being characterized. Like, people at this, nobody really believes, I don't think, that this is all Tyler Shandro's problem, right? Different leaders have different leadership styles, but Jason Kenney is known for running the show, right? He's known for micromanaging. He's known for knowing the files of ministries better than the ministers and oftentimes calling the shots. So I find it hard to believe that Albertans are going to believe, or for that matter, that Canadians would believe, that this was Tyler Shandro that fucked this all up. I don't think people will believe that for a second. Brenna says, I'll accept Kenney's resignation any time now. Carolina's laughing. The so-called highlights. I never know what to call them. It always feels like sort of industry lingo to call them clips. People say we've clipped Kenney from yesterday's media availability, and here's what he had to say. Alana says it would have been nice if Shandro actually resigned from his job, like his whole job. Keep in mind, nobody takes a pay cut here. I mean, I don't know if we're getting into the weeds on this and thinking the health minister should take a pay cut, right? He should lose the top up he gets for being a minister, but instead now he moves into labor, which means that Shandro, to a certain degree now, is going to be, of course, negotiating with nurses. Probably a strategic move on Kenney's part. He says, hey, don't worry, we're going to keep you in the arena. We'll just try to remove a little bit of the heat here. Nicole says there's so much gaslighting there. I mean, the lies here, right? Says Shandro has a hard time forming a sentence when he's up behind the mic. Kenney's in charge. Chelsea says if somebody resigns, this is a great comment from Chelsea, if somebody resigns because they are an incompetent minister, they should not become the minister of something else. I mean, if Shandro truly did resign and then is immediately named to another ministry, what message does that send? Gilles says Shandro absolutely may have come to the end of his own rope in terms of taking the abuse for Kenney. Lala Zaz wonders how qualified are ministers that are interchangeable. Donna says, copping is supposedly going to be just as bad. I don't know. Let me say this. I believe that everybody deserves a shot when it comes to establishing themselves as different, and I'm not the type of person that believes that every elected official or every person involved in or that donated to or that voted for the United Conservative Party is a bad person. I don't think that at all. As a matter of fact, if you pull Jason Kenney and Team Kenney out of the mix, I'm talking about the team behind the scenes, his lobbyists, his power brokers, the people that orchestrated all the stuff around the leadership races and all that shady stuff that the RCMP, we believe, is still looking into. There's a big machine around Jason Kenney. So if you can purge that machine, can the United Conservative Party be reinvented to be a party that people can be proud to support and vote for? That's the question. I heard from a bunch of people yesterday. I'm not going to take the time to read them right now because there's more important things. But people who I respect that reached out. One in particular that said, I've known Jason Copping this is a moderate, I would describe this person as a progressive conservative. This person reached out and said, I've known him for 30 years, and he is competent, and I hope people give him a chance. I'm Ryan Jesperson speaking now. I'm not quoting the letter. This is me speaking now. I never cheer against the province. I never hope to see failure. A government's failure is our problem, right? I hope that Jason Copping can turn the ship around. I find it hard to believe that that's going to happen if Jason Kenney's still calling the shots, because I don't think that half of the MLAs in there are happy to have that guy in the leadership role that he is. And if you don't have the support of your MLAs, let alone your cabinet, your ministers, then what does that say? And what does that mean for people that are expecting and needing, not I want to say expecting, we need good governance and good leadership right now. I think disappearing for weeks at a time, I think refusing to apologize for things, the sorry not sorry incident from about a week ago, it just goes to show that you're at a point right now where people are demanding a change, and I think that happens in one way, shape, or form. I just find it hard to believe Jason Kenney's going to resign today. But hey, maybe I'll be proven wrong. Michelle Wong, quoting Bridget Sterling, says, do you see her tweet? Yes, I didn't see it, Michelle, so thanks for passing it along. She says, imagine failing so badly that your boss disciplines you by giving you a different job with the exact same pay. Meantime, Jeremy, who's watching in, Jeremy is just such an amazing and loyal Real Talker, always pumping our tires, always sharing our content. Jeremy, a shout out to you this morning. He says, I have a hard time with Copping, with Minister Copping. His role in Bill 47 was an insult to working Albertans. Okay. NT says, hey, Copping may be competent, but in politics, you're often judged by the company you keep. And I think that's absolutely correct. You look at a lot of people, even, former ministers that we'll have on this show, and they'll come in and share their thoughts, and people will say, yeah, rich take from someone that was a minister under Alison Redford, or rich take from somebody that was a minister under Rachel Notley. I mean, there is that association, right? And for obvious reasons, people carry it with them. So you can let us know where your thoughts are on that. Of course, we'll be keeping a keen eye on what happens this afternoon. A little bit later on in the show, we'll bring you more of what Premier Jason Kenney had to say yesterday. Right now, and we do this every single Wednesday, I think it's like every once in a while you got to just step away from it all, And we on purpose partner with the team at Tourism Jasper on Wednesdays. It's hump day. It's the middle of the week. On purpose, we give ourselves an opportunity to step away from the headlines and the news cycle and everything, and to get outdoors to beautiful Jasper National Park, a feature we call MyJasper Memories. This one's a little bit different. I shared some photos from our recent family getaway to the park, beautiful Jasper National Park, and I asked you to do the same on my Twitter, and just got a ton of submissions, which is absolutely amazing. And so we partnered with Tourism Jasper. In our conversation earlier this week, we said, why don't we just show off a whole bunch of Real Talkers shots? Because these are just beautiful. They love the idea too, especially when we showed them the photos. But first, we wanted to remind you that from the 1st to the 15th of November, a very special time out in Jasper, it's Veterans Appreciation Week. And Jasper National Park pays tribute to Canadian veterans. It's the first annual Veterans Appreciation event. And Jasper will welcome Canadian veterans, including former and current members of the Canadian Forces, the RCMP, and their supporters to the park, to the National Park. And to thank them for their service, a series of ceremonies have been planned, including National Indigenous Veterans Day, Jasper's Salute to Women Veterans, and Remembrance Day services on the 11th of November. It'll be a 2-week event, including entertainment, guest speakers, performances, including from the PPCLI drumline. The Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry drumline. Have you ever witnessed them in person? Have either? It is powerful stuff. They're going to be out there. The Royal Canadian Artillery Band, the James Gang drummers. Several dignitaries will be there. And it's just going to be wonderful. Businesses in Jasper offering specials to veterans over this period, including hotel packages, restaurant offers, activity promotions. What an amazing time to show your appreciation. Maybe make it possible for a veteran and their family to head out to Jasper. A 3-day trade show as well at the Jasper Activity Center that'll feature businesses owned by Canadian veterans. How cool is this? So you can check out JasperVetFest.com. JasperVetFest.com, and you can learn more about this inaugural event, Jasper's Veterans Appreciation, again, from the 1st to the 15th of November. Let's get to, first of all, let me just take a second and say to Canadian veterans, thank you for your service. Let's get to the photos from Real Talkers. We absolutely love this. This one from Lauren. Now, make sure, here's how you can get your Jasper memories featured on our show. Make sure you post them on Instagram or Twitter using the hashtags MyJasper and RealTalkRJ. This from Lauren. Absolutely beautiful stuff. Got the little guy out there fishing. What an amazing memory. We love this kind of stuff. I can hear those waves hitting the dock. Can't you? Absolutely beautiful. This one from Maltese, who wrote in and said, look at this reflection on Horseshoe Lake. Stunning. Thank you for sharing that. That's the kind of thing you'd like to see an artist paint, hey? That image there. Also shared the sunset at Wapiti Campground, right on the Athabasca River. What a wonderful place to camp. We were on a raft going right past the Wapiti Campground just a couple of weeks ago, and I found myself looking up there. A couple of people had their tents out. I'm going, that is where we're going to stay next.
Wapiti is where I was introduced to my lifelong love of camping.
Really?
First place my family ever took me, Wapiti Campground, Jasper National Park.
You'll never forget that.
Never.
Oh, that's so special. Let's get to some other photos. These are ones that you shared with us, and we encourage you to do the same. If you're sitting on photos from your Jasper memories, we would love to see them again. This one, I love this from our friends at Park Power. That's Chris Kozowski, the founder of Park Power. Absolutely love it. That's just a beautiful, that's a famous bridge there in Jasper. You can go see yourself. And this one from Serena, who sent this in. This is from November 2020. That's still the Athabasca slowly flowing. She says the fall colors were gone by that time last year, but still absolutely stunning. Did I ever tell you guys the story of when we saw a pack of wolves on an elk on the frozen Athabasca River? It was one of the wildest things I've ever seen in my life.
You haven't mentioned it, but I'm sure you went in there and you said, break it up,
I was
guys.
Like, excuse me, that looks like that really is hurting him quite a bit.
You need to stop.
Did you ask if he was in it? I'm not sure about this. But it was like, I feel like if you go all the way to Kenya, or you go somewhere to hope to see, like a lioness take down an ibex or something like that, and we're sitting here going, and Wyatt was with us, and he's just wide-eyed, and Carrie's kind of looking at me, and I'm like, it's real life. I mean, it's real life.
Circle of life here.
We're not going to stay for 3 hours. But every time we go over that bridge now, Wyatt's always like, was that where and I was like, that's right, kiddo. That's where it was. That is real life. You can learn more about our partnership with Tourism Jasper by checking out jasper.travel/realtalk, including our past features. And, of course, we'd love to see your photos with the hashtag MyJasper and the hashtag RealTalkRJ. Now, we're going to turn our attention internationally for the next few minutes. We're talking AI in a little bit. We'll get back to provincial politics and some federal election talk with Jason Markusoff. That's coming up. But how much attention have you been paying to what's going on, the conflict in the Middle East? Guelph Today reporting, and we told you about this a short time ago, that Israeli aircraft struck a series of targets in the Gaza Strip. That was early on Monday. That was September 6th. In response to a series of rocket launches out of the Hamas-ruled territory, it was the third consecutive night of fighting. Michael Keefer is a professor emeritus at Guelph University. He wrote the book back in 2010, Anti-Semitism, Real and Imagined. Also wrote, published in May of 2015, Hard Truths for Canada about Israel and Palestine. He's got a forthcoming book advocating for Palestine and Canada coming out, including the essay Knowing and Not Knowing Canada, Indigenous Peoples, Israel, and Palestine. It's a pleasure to welcome Professor Keefer to Real Talk. Thank you for making time for us, and a good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on, Ryan. Actually, the third book you just mentioned, it's just my essay in a book. It's edited by other people. It's a collection of essays that came out of a conference in honor of the UN Rapporteur on Palestine, Michael Link. So there's lots of other people in it, and lots of great essays by people other than me.
Yeah, no kidding. I appreciate the clarification. Can we start there? I want to ask you about what's going on, including the fighting earlier this month. But the title, Knowing and Not Knowing Canada, Indigenous Peoples, Israel, and Palestine. We've never really had an expert voice on the show. We've had many people comparing and contrasting Palestinians' situation with the situation of Indigenous people in Canada, but never really had an expert voice that can dig into it on the show. Can you lay this out for us and essentially the premise of that essay?
Yeah, the premise of the essay is that there are really excruciating parallels between the things that Canada is doing wrong in relation to our Indigenous people here and the things that we're doing wrong in our Middle Eastern foreign policy, in particular over the issue of Israel and Palestine. We've had a long-term alliance with Israel. I wrote about 10 years ago that I quoted the great English poet, one of his proverbs, opposition is true friendship. In other words, if your friends are doing something that's radically mistaken, radically wrong, true friendship means standing up and opposing it rather than doing what Canada is doing, which is aiding and abetting.
So when Canadians are trying to wrap their minds around what they see happening, and including, continuing violence in the Middle East, unrest there, and in many circumstances, I think, frank analyses that essentially say nothing's going to change. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but that's what we hear time and time again. How can Canadians understand what you might believe to be an empathetic or intuitive or proper response to the conflict in Israel and Palestine in the context of what you'd like to see in Canada? I mean, can you approach both scenarios, obviously in different parts of the world involving different people groups with different histories? Can you approach them? I mean, you say a friend will reach out and confront. What does that actually look like from a policy or other action?
Well, it means in relation to Israel-Palestine, it means that Canada should be adhering to international law, insisting that Israel conform to the Geneva Conventions. The first clause of the Fourth Geneva Convention requires us to do exactly that. In relation to Indigenous people, it means taking a close look at our treaties with Indigenous nations and saying, okay, we're going to start living up to our obligations under those treaties. So that's a kind of parallel, if you like.
Is it fair to say, though, that Canada and other nations would perceive that to be taking a side, and it's not the side that they're inclined to take? I mean, I think that the United States of America makes it very clear. The United States of America is with Israel at all times, at all costs. And that's the impression that I get. Invite you to take issue with it if you would. Canada maybe doesn't take as strong of a position, but it's there. I mean, there was no question, especially under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, that that's where Canada was at. If you were to start suggesting that Canada should take a bold and prominent position insisting that Israel adhere to these conditions, am I a cynic or a realist that I don't see that happening?
It's very hard to make it happen, but one of the things that we should be doing right off the bat is listening to what prominent Israelis have to say. One key person, I would say, is the Israeli sociologist Eva Illouz, who's a full professor at the Hebrew University. She was president of the Bezalel Academy, which is the Israeli Fine Art Academy. She's won awards for her scholarly work in Germany, France, and the United States. So she's a big deal. 7 years ago, she published an essay in Haaretz, which is the oldest and most respected Israeli newspaper, in which she said, now you have to realize it's become very belatedly a consensus internationally that, oh yeah, Israel is in fact guilty of imposing apartheid on the Palestinians in the occupied territory. B'Tselem in Israel says that. That's their major human rights organization. Amnesty International says it. Human Rights Watch says it. So there's clearly something very wrong going on there. What Eva Illouz said 7 years ago is it's a lot worse. She said that in effect, Palestinians in the occupied territories are living under a regime that amounts to enslavement. She said, slavery isn't, and she quotes experts on slavery isn't a matter so much of being bought and sold. It's a matter of living in a permanent state of powerlessness, indignity, undeserved suffering, and dishonor. And she goes into it in great detail. You know, the Kafkaesque legal system, the killings with impunity by settlers, the ongoing settlers and military, the ongoing regime of arbitrary arrest and torture, the ongoing business of colonization. Now, apartheid and colonization are both, according to international law, crimes against humanity. So what I would say in part about Canada's role is, look, if you've got a friend who's been drinking heavily at a party you're both at, and he says, hey, I'm on my way home, you don't just pat him on the back and hand him the car keys and say, go for it, buddy. You say, wait a minute, let's be sensible. Let's do the right thing. And Canada, one of the things that's really puzzling is that if you read the Israeli, the reports of Israeli human rights organizations, Israeli journalists, they're talking openly about these things. They're talking frankly about these things, and it gets filtered out of Canadian discourse. So that's part of what I mean by saying knowing and not knowing. Our journalists, our political classes, our the people who govern our country must be, at least some of them, reading the Israeli press, so they know. They must be passing on that knowledge in some way. So where's the gap? Why aren't we behaving in a way that recognizes international law, as we say we do, respects international law, and would really help to disentangle the situation?
Okay, so let me ask you to answer your own question there. Why do you think we're not?
That's I'd say in part it's probably cowardice. Now, you have to remember, when we talk about Indigenous relations in Canada or about Canadian relations to Israel, Palestine, we're dealing with three communities, all of which have endured very severe intergenerational trauma. The Jewish community, obviously, the Shoah, that echoes and resonates down through generations. The sufferings of the murder of 6 million people, that's not something that can be forgotten. It's not something that ceases to echo in people's lives and in people's minds. And that's bound up with the position taken by still a strong majority. It's a declining majority, but a strong majority of Canada's Jewish community. The Palestinian community, of course, which includes Palestinian Christians, Palestinian Muslims in Canada, are traumatized by another catastrophe. Now, the Hebrew word for what I think is wrongly called the Holocaust, that's a bad term. It comes from Greek. It has implications of a sort of religious offering. The Hebrew word is Shoah. It means catastrophe. Palestinians talk about another catastrophe, the Nakba, 1947-48. The better part of 1 million Palestinians violently expelled from their villages and towns and farms and possessions. And the Nakba, in some ways, is ongoing. 1967, there were further expulsions. There are expulsions, as anyone who reads the news must know, going on in East Jerusalem and the West Bank right now. So these are things that continue. With Indigenous people, of course, there's the genocides, including most particularly the what we call the residential schools, and of course the scandal that really was public knowledge a century ago, that children were dying in horrible numbers in these facilities, these facilities for basically destruction of the life of a community. And so it's that again is something we can't fully pretend not to know about, or we should be able to.
Interesting comment here from Jill, who's watching, says, I bet Israel and Palestine would sit down and figure things out if other countries stayed out of it and all weapons were removed. They wouldn't have a choice but to figure out a way to live side by side. You think that's possible?
It'd be very hard to achieve, but I think that's a very good suggestion. I mean, if Israel weren't receiving all kinds of military goodies, the Israelis would have to sit down and think very seriously about how to get along with their Palestinian brothers and sisters. I mean, the Palestinians basically are fighting back with, in large part, things made and cobbled together in people's garages. So there isn't a big flow of weaponry into, say, the Gaza Strip. But if the United States and other countries were to say, if Canada were to say, look, we are going to follow the suggestions of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, and exert peaceful pressure on you as a way of saying, we're your friends, we're your good friends, and we want to stop you from doing things that are just radically wrong. And so we're going to oppose you. You won't like it. You'll yell and kick up, but it's the best thing for you.
Professor, I'm grateful for your frank commentary. I don't know if that I expected anything less from a guy who titles his books Anti-Semitism, Real and Imagined, and Hard Truths for Canada about Israel and Palestine. It's kind of like naming your show Real Talk. You can't show up and just mess around when it comes to conversations like these, but the conversations can be messy, or at least delicate, and they can be can be combustible. We've obviously been covering this over the course of a number of months that the show's been around. And I think of one interview I did in particular with a very plain and straight-talking Palestinian man. As a matter of fact, two of them that joined us on the show. And it prompted an email, a personal email, that I didn't read on the show, as a matter of fact, because it was from a longtime friend of mine, a guy that I met in high school, a guy that I've known for 25-plus years. And he accused me, and it was quite, I don't need to get into it, really, but it was quite hurtful, as a matter of fact, accused me of perpetuating anti-Semitism on my platform. Because words like the ones that you've used in this interview, like apartheid and enslavement and referencing the BDS movement, equated in his mind, as a Jewish man, equated to anti-Semitism. What does anti-Semitism, real and imagined, mean in the context of what we're talking about here this morning?
Well, real anti-Semitism is, I'm referring here to people like the Jewish Oxford philosopher Brian Klug. It's hatred of Jews as Jews, but understanding Jews to be something that they aren't. In other words, erecting a false image of Jews and then directing hatred at real people through the filter of that falsification. That's part of what real anti-Semitism is, and it's let's not minimize it. It's something that appeared to be in decline. Don't forget, Canada was horribly anti-Semitic for a large part of this century. One of the reasons that Canada has a higher proportion of the descendants of Shoah survivors than I would say the United States does is that until 1948, we were keeping in place severe restrictions against Jewish immigration. During the 1930s, when Jews were desperate to get away from the threat of Nazism, Canada's record in taking in Jewish refugees was, on a per capita basis, we took in 1/5 as many as did the United States, the UK, or Australia. Now, that's pretty bloody shameful. And institutional anti-Semitism persisted in this country until the early 1960s. Now, that declined. But what we have replacing it is the horrendous violence of right-wing fanaticism, neo-Nazis, the kind of people who shot up the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue, killing 11 people, wounding many others. This is a man who had advertised his hatred of Jews and of people who help refugees. And the Tree of Life Synagogue group was very notable in extending help to refugees of all kinds. So that's not to be minimized. Now, imagine anti-Semitism is what you get when people, including our prime minister, I regret to say, fall into the folly of accusing peaceful human rights activists, I would say, including myself, of being anti-Semites because we say certain things need to be done as they were done with South Africa to peacefully persuade a country away from a route that is both destructive and, as many Israeli scholars and journalists and politicians recognize, self-destructive. It's something that eats away at Israeli society, and that's why you have people. I mean, I think your friend's attitudes might be changed if he were to make a point of reading Israeli journalists like Jonathan Cook, or scholars like Eva Illouz when they publish in Haaretz, or Gideon Levy, who's a regular columnist for Haaretz. Haaretz, of course, being the oldest and most distinguished Israeli newspaper, or takes a look at a superb documentary film by Leah Tarachansky, By the Side of the Road. She's an Israeli who is currently living in Canada, Israeli journalist, filmmaker. So there's a lot out there available by Jews, and I'm thinking of the Jewish historian Tony Judt. He was a great historian. He was asked by a journalist once, look, you've been active in setting up independent Jewish voices, which is opposed to current Israeli policies in many ways. Doesn't that make you a self-hating Jew? And Tony Judt took a long pause, and he said, you've got something there. I do hate myself, but not because I'm a Jew. which I thought was a pretty good answer.
So this is a situation, I think, that I try to speak in terms just as plainly as possible. There are so many dynamics at play. This is obviously deep-seated conflict that would appear to be one with no end in sight. It's not as though I think the majority of people on planet Earth that are seeing this conflict believe that this is going to wrap up in the next week or two or next month. But I think we can all agree that it's tragic to see. I think we can all agree on that. Right?
It is tragic, and things are changing. I think that's one hopeful sign. There is a definite, measurable shift in the opinions of North American Jews, in particular Jews in the United States. People are becoming increasingly vocal in, they're still attached, obviously, to the state of Israel. They have many people have lived there. Many of my Jewish friends have lived in Israel for extended periods. They love the country, but they're willing to be forcefully critical and to say, we've got to turn this around.
Professor, what I think is most interesting there is that you point out in particular that you're talking about North American Jews. You're talking about Jewish people in Canada, and in particular, you say the United States. You're not talking about people in Israel. And so that would lead me to believe that you believe that pressure from the international community is incredibly important, maybe the most important factor at play here. Is that the point?
Well, that's what Israeli journalists like Gideon Levy say repeatedly. They say, look, help us. Stop giving our state weapons. Help us by exerting pressure. And you can bet Gideon Levy's taken a lot of heat from his fellow Israelis over that. But he and other Israeli journalists are no less critical. So it's I think we one of the things that's embarrassing about the situation is that if you look at the Israeli media, it's so much more open. It's so much more willing to print and to carry on different television stations really stringent criticisms of current policy. By comparison, I'm really grateful to you for this interview and grateful to you for your other interventions. The spectrum of what can be said and heard in this country is really sadly narrow.
I'm grateful for you putting this in terms that we can understand and for your ongoing insights. I appreciate you making yourself available to us. I want to remind our audience members that they can find more about what you do at michaelkeefer.com. And they can follow you on Twitter at profmhkeefer. Michael Keefer is a professor emeritus out of Guelph University and a valued guest on this program. It's been nice to connect with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I do appreciate it.
And Real Talkers, I want to say thank you for your comments on the live chat here. I just know for a fact we're going to get emails about this. Every time we talk about Israel and Palestine, we get emails. And that's fine. I don't ask you to refrain from saying what you think. The show is called Real Talk. You know, to my pal that sent me an email a while ago, it obviously stung. And I was able to respond and have a dialogue with him. And we're committed to exploring issues in meaningful ways. And I appreciate Michael Keefer dialing into anti-Semitism, real and imagined, his essay, Knowing and Not Knowing Canada, Indigenous Peoples, Israel, and Palestine, in the forthcoming book, Advocating for Palestine in Canada. A great conversation. You know, somebody on the live chat, where's the name? I want to find the name to give credit. This was like the greatest comment I've ever seen. Somebody said Real Talk should be shown to high schoolers. It's such a mind-expanding show. And I went, oh my gosh, I'm going to walk with that comment all week. I apologize. I mean, the live chat's going nuts right now with a whole bunch of comments, so I'm scrolling back and back and back, and I should have written your name down. I apologize, but thank you to whoever it was that said that. That really means a lot. As a matter of fact, it was Stelly. Real Talk should be shown to high schoolers. It's truly mind-expanding. I'm excited. I haven't even told the team this yet, but coming up in a couple of weeks, we're actually cutting one of our shows short. We're going to wrap it at around noon Eastern, at around 10 o'clock, because I've actually been invited to present, like to virtually present, into a new media and journalism class, which is going to be really neat. The professor reached out and said that this is a class. She said this was amazing. She said this is a classroom full of real talkers at this post-secondary institution. Said and asked if we'd be willing to chime in and do a live hit with that classroom. I said, "Are you kidding me? This is our next. It's not our next generation of audience. It's part of our existing audience and an engaged audience is that. We love you guys. Thanks very much." Let me remind you that Athabasca University is Canada's online university. We know. Everybody's been sitting in front of computers for like 18 months now, right? How eager are you to take your meetings off of Zoom and get back in person? But we know that, maybe we're not quite there, and people have different comfort levels, and depending on where you are in Canada, it might not even be possible at this point. And so, while we take opportunities to get out and explore and remember what it's like to be outside, you may still find your best fit for school at Athabasca U. Some of you had a digital experience with your studies last year, we know, but AU is well positioned for the pandemic because it is truly an online university. They didn't have to pivot on the fly and whip a few things together. The delivery method wasn't temporary or rushed or barely meeting the needs. It's what they do every day. You can do your schooling from anywhere at athabascau.ca. Kids are at soccer practice. Maybe you're in the hotel with work travel. It's way easier to incorporate schooling into your life when you don't have to work around a particular time and place. AU fits your schedule and your life.
The following paid advertisement does not necessarily represent the views of Ryan Jesperson, Real Talk, or Relay Communications Group Incorporated. It's time for a fresh perspective. Edmonton deserves a leader who will work for you and with you. Someone who understands the strengths of our community to do things better and faster. Cheryl Watson has built her career on results, not promises. On October 18th, vote Watson for mayor, and together, let's build a city that works. This ad is paid for by the Watson for Mayor campaign.
Our friends at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge Jeep want to remind you that right now they have up to $10,000 available in special discounts on the Ram 1500, up to $3,000 bonus cash for select owners. We're talking about that 2021 Ram 1500 Classic. This is the one I was telling you about, the one that we drove out to Jasper. Loved this truck. The quad cab, had the tonneau cover on the back. It was a perfect fit for the family. You're loading up golf bags, maybe getting into snowboarding season. You got to find a way to have, the dog beds and the skis and all the kids' toys. And yeah, I'm literally just describing my own personal life. The Ram 1500 Classic, a perfect fit. And while selection's tough these days at any dealership, that's just the reality for the next couple of months. You'll find the best selection of Dodge trucks and the entire Jeep lineup at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge Jeep. Coming up in just a second, we're going to talk to Jason Markusoff from Maclean's, but I wanted to get to the second part of what we pulled from Premier Jason Kenney's news availability yesterday. It'll tee up my conversation with Jason quite nicely, I think. Of course, a caucus meeting later today. People are wondering what that means for the political future of Premier Jason Kenney, what it means for the political future of the United Conservative Party, and maybe how it ties in or dovetails with the federal election results. Let's get up to speed. Here's a portion of what the Premier said just a number of hours ago, yesterday afternoon.
Using the logic that you applied here today about needing a change in the health portfolio to move forward, I think it's fair to say that people within your own party, including Joel Mullen, who posted an op-ed today specifically calling on your resignation, also want a new direction in your office and in your position. You did that with former Health Minister Shandro. Why not do that yourself?
Again, there have been voices of opposition to public health policies from within my own party from day one of the pandemic. It's not a secret, but my responsibility as Premier is to listen to public health advice, look at the reality, not wish it away, not allow politics to pressure us from taking the necessary steps to save lives and protect the healthcare system. And I've always known from day one that has created some internal division. It's no secret within my party. As I just said, tens of thousands of Albertans last night voted for a anti-vaccine, anti-public health policy party, and some of those people are not happy with the public health policies of government. I get it. I would say to them, in terms of leadership and internal politics, let's deal with those things at the right time when we're past the crisis, not in the middle of the crisis, when whoever is in my chair has to stay focused on the big decision.
Jason Markusoff is an award-winning feature writer and columnist for Maclean's magazine based out of Calgary. You see him all the time on national news outlets, including CBC's Power and Politics Power Panel, and a good friend of this show. Jason, welcome back. It's good to see your face.
I don't think I've been on this show yet, have I?
Yeah, you have. Yeah, when we launched, haven't you? Yeah, you have. Come on. Markusoff's never been on the show. Last time we talked was on Chad, really?
I think so. And that was
Wow.
Have you been a year on the show, by the way?
You know what? Coming up in 3 days, Saturday will be the 1-year anniversary of me getting fired. So that's coming up in a year from now. I just talked to a former colleague of mine at the radio station the other day, and I told her that. She goes, "How long has it been?" I said, "We're coming up on a year." She goes, "No." She goes, "You're wrong." I said, "No, I wouldn't be wrong about remembering when I was publicly hanged and attempted to have my career flushed down the toilet. I wouldn't forget that." And she goes, "No." She goes, "Right, it's been 2 years." I go, "No, it's definitely not been 2 years." So I guess if that's the truth, my bad. I don't know what the hell took me so long. It's great to have you making your Real Talk debut.
Nice to be here.
Nothing personal, pal. That clip there from Jason Kenney touches on the point that you make, a great point in your most recent piece, September 21st. It was published. People can find it. And of course, at macleans.ca. The fact that Jason Kenney is experiencing political problems, but they do not all root from the same I mean, it's not the same problem. It's a culmination of problems. You got people that believe the premier's doing a lousy job because he's not clamping down enough. You got people that believe he's doing a lousy job because he's clamping down too much. He's taking fire from two different sides here, at least two different sides.
And what seems to be happening now is that those two sides are coming together. They can't agree on much. It's kind of a, there are these rough, splits between those groups, the urban and the rural, the old progressive conservative and the wild rose. And right now they're, pro-vaccine passport and pro-variant. I don't know, to use a reductionist term. what's combining them now is their deep disaffection for Jason Kenney's management style and his approach to things, and just the way he's handled this, in various stages of, depending on which Jason Kenney comes, either the Jason Kenney who is very confident in his decision to open Canada, open Alberta forever, or the one who reluctantly pulls things back and has to implement the vaccine passport he's opposed. Both of those have been various points really ticked off people in his base and people around the province. And those people are now coalescing, thinking that this has gotten so bad. His management, his answers have gotten so untrustworthy and so disillusioning for conservatives that it is incumbent upon them to get rid of him and start anew.
I feel like in a lot of those circumstances, this is just obviously my personal opinion, that a lot of these people didn't care that Jason Kenney had a reputation for lying, cheating, and stealing until his lying, cheating, and stealing started impacting them. There have been people that have been talking about these tendencies and his track record for a long time. Now, it all culminates potentially to what happens this afternoon in this caucus meeting, which I said earlier could be a dramatic outcome, or it could be nothing at all. A lot of times people get all worked up talking about these tectonic shifts that are about to happen, and then really nothing happens. I mean, yesterday, I think the precursor, Tyler Shandro moved into labor, Jason Copping moved into health, just the old switcheroo. Whether or not it'll take pressure off the premier enough remains to be seen. But what did you make of that small shuffle yesterday in the biggest ministry?
It really is going to depend on why this happened. I mean, there are two theories out there. One is that Jason Kenney wanted to, show that he was making some changes, he was acknowledging some problems. So he asked Shandro to leave and to take, and to bring in a new health minister, and cue everybody I know, making jokes about deck chairs on the Titanic. So that's one option. The other option, and it's the one I believe, the other theory is that Shandro was so fed up. I have heard that he has asked to quit. He has wanted to quit in the past. He's threatened to quit because he is so frustrated with Jason Kenney's leadership and top-down actions on this, that he wanted out. He was like, I can't handle this anymore. The election's over. I've been with you this long. I want out. And
Jason, are you talking he wants out of health or he wants out of being an MLA?
Oh, I would no. I mean, health to start at least. I mean, I don't think anybody's really happy too happy in their jobs in the Conservative government right now. Not to talk to some of them, certainly. No, I'm thinking that he just wanted out of health. He didn't want to be the fall guy on this amid this incredible crisis, as we're sounding the national alarm, as we're near triage protocols in our ICUs. He was fed up with being the guy who was blamed for not putting in measures, then putting them in too late, and then a whole bunch of people on the anti-vax side hating it. I mean, this takes a toll, and Jason Kenney's right about this. This takes a toll on your family. This certainly took a toll on Tyler Shandro and his family. It would take a toll on anybody. But I think, especially given the way that Jason Kenney's been, yanking them to and fro on this with levels of certainty that no experts and no right-thinking politicians or decision makers would have on this, that he got fed up. I'm not sure that's the case. I haven't gotten that confirmed. But that is one theory out there, and it's one I'm inclined to believe.
I read earlier from Don Braid's interview or his piece that was recently published talking to Leela here. She's pulling no punches, and I guess you might argue that she really has nothing to lose, calling essentially for his resignation, saying yesterday that him moving Shandro out of health was a despicable move, trying to save his own hide, basically. And then you've got Joel Mullen, who's policy vice president of the party, of the United Conservative Party, writing publicly. Until last week, I was one of Jason Kenney's most vocal supporters. I campaigned for him in both leadership races and the unity vote. In light of the choices he made last week, I can no longer support him. I indeed believe he must resign. This is from the VP of Policy for the party. Quote, his communications have been disastrous. His planning without vision or flexibility. He seems unwilling to plan for more than one possibility. He's painted himself into a corner where the only way out is to make himself a liar. Wow.
Yep, he's engendered deep animosity on both sides of this issue. Absolutely, he has. Whether you see more people joining Lila here and saying this publicly, certainly the stage whisper campaign is very loud right now. Lila here is the first MLA on the UCP side to be this blunt, this public, whether she's acting on her own or whether she's kind of at the forefront of a movement. It's hard to say, but today is going to tell us how many people are there yet.
Yeah, and I guess that's
there yet to push him right away.
That's if you're
and also we don't know how many executives on the UCP board. That's Joel Mullen, but he is one of several people with the VP title on the UCP on the UCP org chart. So we'll see how many people feel that way, are ready to feel that way publicly and go that far at this point.
Yeah, and if we've seen anything in past, we've seen that Mullen, in sticking his neck out, will undoubtedly in some way, shape, or form pay the piper, most likely, for what Jason Kenney will see as a betrayal. You talk about Lila here speaking out as perhaps the first. I guess that's if we don't count Todd Loewen and Drew Barnes. And, it'll be interesting to see who's really calling the shots in this caucus meeting. I mean, how important is it? People oftentimes talk about political leaders and how they're able to whip their caucus into believing a common thing, or sharing a common priority, or perpetuating a common message. Do you think that this party is broken beyond repair, or do you think that a caucus meeting with appropriate communication and leadership, maybe some humility from Jason Kenney, could save this? I mean, could the United Conservatives still, let's say Jason approximately a year and a half out from an election, right this ship, and could Jason Kenney win another election, becoming a 2-term premier in the province?
Man, it's hard to predict what's going to happen a year and a half away in politics right now, and especially in Alberta. But in terms of today, Jason strategy, and you kind of heard him, forwarding this theory in the. Sorry, can you hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry, heard some background noise. His strategy, and you kind of heard it in that clip you said, is he may try to forestall his date with the hangman. He's, talking about this is not the time. There's a time and place for this sort of review and consideration of leadership. We are in the deep throes of a crisis now. Let's keep things stable. If that's a weird, it's a weird argument to do that, to say that and replace your health minister on the verge of ICU system collapse. But let's set that aside for a second. There will be people on those, in the party, in the caucus, who want to do two things. One, not totally create more chaos in Alberta than there already is, even if they deeply dislike Kenney and want him out. And two, they may have a preference to let the grassroots, let the membership decide, not take into their own hands, lest the members get suddenly, have this big spasm of pro Kenney sympathy. I don't find that incredibly likely, but there, they will, he will likely appeal to the, let's let the grassroots members decide, let's let the people decide in the party, not the elected MLAs. So that could very much be the dynamic and the saving grace that he puts out there. In journalism and political watching, you always like to, you err toward the most exciting result. A nail-biter of election, huge flashpoint, huge important meeting. Often they don't end up being quite as exciting as you expect. Sometimes they just kick the can down the road to action in the future, and sometimes that can gets kicked down the road indefinitely. I think back to, you've been around this game a long time. I think back to the internal knifing that felled Ralph Klein, Ed Stelmach, Alison Redford. It usually starts small with a couple voices, and then more, till there's this clear critical mass and the leader realizes it's time. This is not going to get better. The funny thing is we seem to be at the point almost where Alison Redford wound up leaving. Ed Stelmach jumped really, really early. Ralph Klein hung on too long and was embarrassed. Jason Kenney seems the stubborn type to hang on longer than is necessary, longer than he can before it seems like there's no turning back.
But that's what I think makes people nervous, right, Jason? Is like if you get to the point where you have, and I'm not saying that it's here yet, but if you have a full-blown mutiny, and if you have dysfunction within caucus, and if you have a premier or any political leader, quite frankly, that comes across as doing whatever they can in defiant fashion to preserve their position, I mean, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence, most especially at a time of crisis, right? Most especially in the middle of arguably the highest wave of the pandemic.
Yeah, the opposite holds true, though. If he goes right now, what happened in that vacuum? You need to have a premier. Who is that premier? What side of the ledger does he come from in this deeply divided caucus on whether to clamp down on, to protect public health or whether to free up to protect freedom? There are, if, somebody like a Jason Nixon becomes interim leader, say, or premier for now, the Alberta government could take a very drastically different approach than it is today to public health. I can't imagine anybody from the old PC side tightening things, but that's the sort of tension and uncertainty that may persuade some of the MLAs and some party members to say, well, let's just not do this right now. We still have a lot of time before the election to get some party renewal because Jason Kenney's a dead duck in a general election. Polls have been showing for a year now that the NDP is leading. So a lot of people could think we have time. We can do this, say, in November when there's the UCP general meeting on the Tsutina Reserve. So let's do it then and not do it right now when we are, having terrible death counts and hospitalization rates during the fourth wave.
Do you have, if you were going to put $100 down on who the next leader might be, interim or otherwise, is there a name that immediately pops to mind? I've got somebody that has, I can't give the specifics of who she is because it would identify her and I don't want to do that. But let's just say she's a former high-ranking Tory with a ton of credibility, and she's convinced that it's going to be Travis Taves. As a matter of fact, there are some rumblings, and this is not from her, a separate source indicating that Travis Taves has been the architect. We're talking about the finance minister of a lot of what we're seeing right now. Is that a name that pops up in your circle?
I've heard it. Two things about that is that if you appoint a leader who is quietly against public health restrictions, that's really dangerous right now for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. Two, normally the guy who leads the mutiny does not get to wear the throne or wear the crown. One doesn't wear a throne. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
Wear the crown. It would be to a neutral party, an honest broker. The name that's come up in my conversations, and I mean, we're at that stage in the leadership crisis where everybody's openly talking about. So who's interim leader now? Come on, I think we're at that stage now. Rick McIver was a name that came up a lot. I feel yesterday's very goofy episode where he put out this letter to Bill Blair, the public safety minister federally, sounding the SOS on asking for the support transferring patients by plane and offering military or other federal support for public health staff. That he claimed on Twitter, bizarrely, that he didn't know who was going to be the public safety minister, so they couldn't send that message out until after the election. Well, that's not how government works. I've been in politics since 2001 continuously.
It's unbelievable. And I don't mean like it's unbelievable. Like it's unbelievable. I mean, it's not believable.
It's not the stuff of an interim premier, let's say. So I don't know. I don't know what happens. And I feel like that uncertainty is going to be a break on whatever caucus may decide to do today. That said, everybody's really bloody-minded and angry and disillusioned and sort of out of sorts right now. Everybody seems like they're at loose ends. And a lot of people may say, rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get Jason Kenney out of here now, and we'll start the rebuilding process and hopefully keep things steady on the health side. But again, there may be this break because is now the time for this, for this uncertainty about who leads.
Jason,
what direction they take.
I know you've got to get to your next piece, and we've got a couple of guests in the bullpen, so to speak, ready to rock. But I have to ask you, before we go, for either your general or specific observations about the federal election. In particular, I mean, you wrote just recently, just yesterday, about Maxime Bernier, about how Jason Kenney and Max just can't stand each other. You know, you write, Kenney privately regards the PPC leader as unserious and reckless. Bernier has lately been calling Alberta's premier a despot for instituting a vaccine passport. When it comes to seats surrendered, George Chahal winning for the Liberals in Calgary, it remains to be seen, rather, what's going to happen in Edmonton Centre. About 3,000 mail-in ballots being counted, about 136 votes, the difference between Randy Boissonneau taking that riding back for the Liberals away from James Cumming for the Conservatives, who, of course, is the incumbent. You got Blake Desjardins knocking off Kerry Diot in what some may have called an unlikely win in Edmonton Griesbach, and of course, Heather McPherson, a triumphant second win in Edmonton Strathcona, winning by a wide margin for the NDP in that riding that's been held by the NDs for a number of years now. What do you make of those? I mean, some people are laying those wins, or if you want to call them losses for the Conservatives, at the feet of Jason Kenney. Other people are saying, well, it's because the vote was split. That certainly wouldn't hold up in a couple of the ridings, looking at the PPC totals. But who's to blame? I mean, if you're Aaron O'Toole, where is your ire directed?
In terms of the 3 Alberta seats that will or may flip, I would say Jason Kenney bears a lot of the burden for those. But that said, I mean, George Chahal is incredibly popular on a personal basis in Calgary Skyview, and the surge of his vote, they almost doubled. I mean, they only got I think the CPC got 52% of the vote last time in that riding, and we're now relegated to second place. That's a huge drop, and a lot of that has to do with people liking George Chahal and liking Trudeau generally, and wanting a seat at the table in government. In the NDP, for Desjardins, you have to give a huge amount of credit to the NDP for running an incredible organization, for putting a lot of effort. I was up in Edmonton in late August. I could not believe how many signs there were in Griesbach early on in the campaign that were painted orange. And in Edmonton Centre, that's the seat of government. People do not like Jason Kenney there, so I think that one is a straight government play. Because actually, if you look at the vote share, Boissonneau didn't do too much better. It's that James Cumming fell.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Jason, I can't believe it took us, 9 months to get you on the show. I'll own that one. We owe you lunch for sure, and we'll continue to read your great work at macleans.ca. Thanks for making time for us.
I'll invoice for lunch shortly.
You got it, buddy. That's Jason Markusoff, who does a fantastic job for Maclean's and award-winning. I am an willing broadcaster. He is an award-winning columnist.
Enunciate.
I will enunciate the key points, and our thanks to Jason Markusoff. That's funny. Making his return to Real Talk. He's like, no, I'm not, dude. I've never been on. Right. About that. Deflect. Remind everybody right now how excited I know the team at Explore Edmonton is to be able to welcome Rugby Sevens to Commonwealth Stadium. That's coming up September 25th and 26th. What an amazing opportunity to check out a sport, a spectacle that so many people have not been exposed to, because, I mean, these types of events typically don't even land in North America. They were unable to get it to the UK. That means that Vancouver and Edmonton, the benefactors. This is an absolutely fan-friendly event. You don't have to be in the know. You don't have to be in deep on understanding rugby. Here's the gist. It's 7 players per side, 7 minutes per half, and a whole ton of fun. So figure out your costumes, get your flags ready to wave, and head over to canadasevens.com to get your tickets. Now, what are they doing to keep you safe while they're there? They're requiring proof of full vaccination or a negative on-site COVID test, a rapid test. When you're not in your designated seat, they'll be requiring masks. And, of course, we want to remind you that you can get single-day ticket passes. You're there all day. They're on sale for as little as $60, a full-day pass. Canadasevens.com, presented by the team at Explore Edmonton. Also wanted to remind you that our friends at Friesen Brothers, time is running out. You've got one more day. You've got today and tomorrow to get in on the 44th annual Alberta Beef Roundup. You can find more details at friesen.com. A whole hip of fresh Alberta beef butchered exactly how you like it. I mean, if you want the whole thing in ground round, I wouldn't recommend that, but you could. You want more roasts? You want more steaks? You're a stewing fanatic? I mean, you do the best stew on the block and you know it. You need stewing cubes. The butchers, the real butchers in-house, they'll get that all cut and packaged up for you so you can fill your freezer. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown and Alberta owned. I also checked in with our good buddy Daryl at Westworld Computers yesterday. I said, hey man, what's shaking? I said, we've been telling people that you're hiring. He said, yeah, remind him, employment at westworld.ca. He said, but also we are going to have, he says, because of course we're a Bell authorized dealer, they're going to have the iPhone 13 on launch day. So you can get in touch with them at westworld.ca, or you can swing by the store. The store that they've been owning and operating is a family-owned independent business for more than 40 years. To pre-order your iPhone 13, delivery will start as early as this Friday. You can learn more details on how you can get in on iPhone 13 launch day at westworld.ca. That feels like, in a way, a decent segue. We talk about our smartphones and how we access tech and maybe even some of the security concerns that might come along with that. AI, machine learning, is integrating itself into our everyday life, maybe in more ways than we even realize. But when does it become dangerous? The United Nations has actually called for a moratorium on AI that threatens human rights. We wanted to go to foremost experts on this. We didn't want to go to conspiracy theorists or people that have read about this on Facebook, because as a matter of fact, Facebook factors into this story. And that's why we're thrilled that our next two guests have agreed to join us. Amy Winecoff is a data researcher at Princeton University Center for Information Technology Policy. Her research focuses on human algorithm interactions, taking into consideration how people shape and react to algorithms. Ryan Calo is a professor of law at the University of Washington and an international expert on the legal and policy aspects of robotics and AI. He co-founded the leading North American conference on law and robotics, We Robot, which will celebrate its 10th anniversary online, as a matter of fact, this week. So a welcome to the both of you. And Ryan, I suppose, happy anniversary. Why don't we get right in?
Thank you very much.
Oh, there we are. We've got your audio. Good stuff. Let's get into this. Amy, generally speaking, I mean, the UN calling for a moratorium on AI that threatens human rights. People are going to be going, hang on a second, this sounds like something I should know more about. What are the key points here? What do we need to be focusing on?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is that people mean a lot of different things when they say artificial intelligence. So the core thing to think about is that artificial intelligence and machine learning, they're just types of algorithms, where an algorithm is anything where instructions are used to perform a task or achieve an outcome. What's different about AI and machine learning algorithms is that they learn those rules from the data. So that can be really powerful because these algorithms can learn patterns from the data that it would be really difficult for humans to understand or to identify. But at the same time, data can contain biases. They can contain all the same biases that humans themselves have. So if humans have problematic biases around race and gender, AI algorithms and machine learning algorithms can also have these biases and even make them worse over time. And that's a core thing to understand about this problem.
So, Ryan, are we already seeing this happen? I mean, is this manifesting itself to the point where people need to take it seriously?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I like to group the problems with artificial intelligence into two groups. The problems when it doesn't work, for all the reasons that Amy alluded to, and the problems when it works, right? I mean, artificial intelligence is, I completely agree, it's a set of techniques that are aimed at approximating some aspect of human or sometimes animal cognition using machines. And it's very specific what it can do well. And sometimes what it can do well is dangerous from a human rights perspective. And sometimes when it doesn't do what it's supposed to be doing, that can have a disparate impact, especially on vulnerable populations and minorities.
Okay, so we're talking about, are we talking about access to employment, access to public services? I mean, Amy, in plain terms, the members of the general public, I think this is probably, it's safe to say, has been flying under the radar, right? But are there particular or key, applications here where it's really especially becoming something significant?
Sure. So I think to the extent that the public is aware of these potential harms of AI, what they're thinking about is if, for example, female applicants are applying for tech jobs and an algorithm is trained on what applicants have previously been successful, then that AI algorithm may learn to discriminate against female applicants for that job. In the academic parlance, we would call that a harm of allocation. So like something is taken away from somebody. What I think is important to recognize, though, is that sometimes there are more subtle things that are still really problematic that are encoded into AI algorithms. So sometimes a racial stereotype, it doesn't directly take something away from someone. It doesn't mean that they're not going to get approved for a loan necessarily, but it can still be really harmful in terms of perpetuating those stereotypes and even lending them legitimacy, because people tend to think of AI algorithms as objective when they're really the same as any other human data.
That's interesting. It's fascinating, and I don't think we haven't talked about this nearly enough. I want to reference that it's the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and when she called for a moratorium on the sale and use of AI, suggesting that these systems are threatening human rights, the implication was that adequate safeguards need to be in place to ensure that the tech won't be abused. And I want to pick both of your brains on this. Ryan, we'll start with you. What does that look like? I mean, what is an adequate safeguard? Who deems it to be so, and who bears that burden? I mean, whose responsibility is it?
That's a great but a big question. I mean, I think that if we back up a little bit, what we're seeing with the UN is an embrace of something that is called the precautionary principle. And the precautionary principle is a principle of governance that says if you're going to do something that has real material risks to society, you, the person who wants to do that activity, have to be able to show us, it's your burden of proof, that it's safe enough, right? And it's a principle that grew out of European environmental regulation and has come to be part of the debate about technology. The issue is, especially in the United States, but elsewhere as well, we tend to be very hands-off about technology, and especially information technology, where bits instead of bones are on the line. And what the UN is trying to do is say, look, this stuff is dangerous, and it's hurting people now. It's hurting people by being too good at its job and making surveillance too easy. And it's hurting people by being bad at its job, when, even though, as Amy pointed out, people tend to think of it as objective and right.
Amy, what would you add to that?
Sure. So there are many cases where, or at least there are some cases where people are making moves towards regulating AI, but in a lot of tech industries, there isn't regulation of AI. So what researchers are doing to try to change that is to pose guidelines for what we would call AI ethics. The issue with these guidelines is that they tend to be very abstract. So what a tech worker actually does with these abstract rules, or even a tech company, is not necessarily clear if there isn't regulatory oversight. So we need to get more specific about what do we mean by ensuring that AI is safe and equitable, and figuring out ways that we can support tech workers and tech companies to achieve those types of ideals.
I've never heard of this before. That doesn't mean it's not happening. There are a lot of things happening that I've never heard of before. But Scott, one of our engaged listeners who's watching us live right now on YouTube, says Amazon is using an algorithm to fire people if they aren't dropping off enough packages. A human has no say in the firing. It's very scary. Have either of you heard of that? Is that a real thing?
Yes, it's a real thing. What's happening is that now, of course, the company would say that it's it's offering this as a service to the drivers by saying you can get a bonus if you let us spy on you and then make determinations about whether you drove safely or efficiently. Of course, the problem with that is it's just a question of baselines, right? I mean, if your pay is not adequate and in order to make a living, you need to get that bonus, then it becomes de facto obligatory. And again, the problem here is it's not working very well. You know, these drivers are getting cut off and they have no recourse. They have no transparent recourse to show that a particular traffic incident that inured against them in terms of compensation was really someone else's fault. And I think that's not but even honestly, again, Ryan, I'll come back to this, even if it worked really, really well, is that the kind of society we want to be in? I mean, it's like this acceleration of these, again, to use academic speak, sort of Tayloristic ideas about hyper efficiency and segmentation that artificial intelligence is supercharging.
I think that's such a great question that you ask, Ryan, is even if it works or even if it improves service, is that something you want? And I noticed, Amy, that you were nodding your head when he was talking. I just want to. This might be strange to sort of roll into your CV, Amy, in the middle of the interview, but I want to establish some context here for people with the question I want to ask you. So you're great. You received your PhD. You're at Princeton now, but you went to another school people might have heard of. Your PhD in psychology and neuroscience from Duke University, and you went on after leaving academia. You developed machine learning models for government agencies, including the U.S. Air Force, to explain and predict human behavior. So you have a vast and deep understanding of how this type of thing can play out. What Ryan just touched on there and what Scott mentioned about Amazon in our live chat, is this more common than people might realize? Is this the direction that business and service delivery is going in? And I'll acknowledge I'm probably just pigeonholing the perspective. It's probably way wider than any of us really realize.
Sure. I mean, one of the problems with the deployment of these algorithms is a lot of times we don't know that they're being used. So if you're streaming music on a platform, guess what? That is algorithmically determined. If you are watching movies, that's algorithmically determined. What a shopping site might show you online, that's based on previous data, and often that's algorithmically determined. But it's not necessarily going to tell you online, hey, that we're using an algorithm here based on some previous data, and we're using that to try to give you what you like from a positive perspective, or more cynically, encourage you to buy more stuff or consume more content or comment on stuff in ways that maybe aren't that helpful in social media. So these algorithms are everywhere. In a lot of cases, they're invisible. And that's one of the problems, is that users can't push back against the technology and understand its benefits and limitations if they don't know where it's being deployed.
Ryan, you're an expert, of course, on law and robotics. And as we mentioned, We Robot, your conference celebrating its 10th anniversary online this week. People can Google We Robot and learn more about that, or check out WeRobot2021.com. How much has the conversation changed in the 10 years that you've been doing We Robot in what we're talking about here when it comes to people's legal rights or legal implications of tech?
Well, you know, I'll tell you, the main way that it's changed is that you no longer have to convince people that there's an issue. And I think the chief benefit of a conference like We Robot is that you have a lot of alumni, that is to say, people who have come through there, they've attended the conference, they've presented papers, they've commented on papers, who get very sophisticated about the legal and policy aspects of the issues. And so nowadays, whenever I read a story in the news about an autonomous vehicle or a drone, it is often somebody from our conference who is commenting in this really lucid, sophisticated way. You benefit the whole ecosystem when you have a really good conversation. The other thing about We Robot is that we have some of the Amy's, not exactly the Amy's. I mean, that she has a very unique perspective and training. Wow. But we do have roboticists and artificial intelligence experts who participate as well alongside law and policy folks to keep us honest about the state of the technology and sober-eyed. And I think that's key here. Like, it's having people like Amy who really know the models and really do the work, being the people to explain it.
Yeah, no pressure, Amy. But Ryan, I appreciate that you said that you put it in the terms that we've applied, or the expectation we've applied to business or anything. I mean, to keep people honest, to keep them honest. I mean, it's been the tagline of investigative journalists for years, isn't it? Amy, you work in the realm of AI ethics. Why do you think that academic studies on AI ethics have, for the most part, failed to change the behavior of software developers and even tech companies?
Sure. So like I mentioned before, a lot of what has been posited so far, these guidelines, they're really, really abstract. So if you say, hey, we want your AI models to be more fair. Okay, I'm a developer working at a tech company. I have a very specific problem. That doesn't necessarily tell me what I specifically need to do. So there is some work that's starting to emerge to say, hey, we need to consider the whole tech ecosystem and understand better, for people who are developing these kinds of models in industry, what are the social pressures? What are the organizational pressures that shape how they make these kinds of decisions? And let's design tools and more concrete solutions that allows them to be able to think about these kinds of ethical issues in their work.
Before we thank you both for your time, we want to focus in on another tech story that I know a lot of people have been talking about. I mean, Facebook is the entity that is Facebook. I'm not sure that most people, including myself, truly realize the influence, the power that Facebook has. We talk about influencing elections. We talk about, all of the algorithms and the way that it works in the marketplace, and Facebook entering crypto. And we could talk for 3 hours, couldn't we? But, a new Washington Post series has revealed that the company knows in acute detail that its platforms are riddled with flaws that cause harm, perhaps only in ways that the company totally understands. I'm curious for both of your insights into this. I'm sure you've been paying attention to the story, Ryan. That was in the Wall Street Journal, rather. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so the Wall Street Journal got a hold of an internal set of documents where the company said in its own words, we know that there's this kind of problem and that kind of problem and this kind of problem. And we've either been unable or unwilling for business reasons fully to address it. And that kind of thing is damaging, right? It's damaging to have something be said in your own words. But I think of all the things that I've learned in the last couple of weeks, I think the most disturbing thing was the Ryan Mack and his colleagues writing for the New York Times, talking about the strategy that Facebook has deployed, where it has subtly altered people's news feeds in order to see more positive stories about Mark Zuckerberg and about the platform Facebook itself. That is such dangerous territory. It's such dangerous territory because the whole premise of not regulating these platforms is that they're just a conduit. They're not trying to shape anything, they're just reflecting the world. But if they start to shape things in ways that are trying to shape public opinion on purpose, that strikes me as quite dangerous.
And yet, Amy, I suspect that most people wouldn't expect anything less, which is troubling in itself. You're going to go, well, of course Facebook's doing that.
I think you could say from an outsider perspective, of course, Facebook is doing that. But a lot of times harms happen just because people didn't think about it. They didn't spend the time up front to say, okay, what could go wrong here? So it's possible that some of these effects that we would see were unintended by the developers. And how we think about those problems of both the unintended long-term consequences, as well as in some cases, the intended long-term consequences, they still matter. And people are still accountable to those decisions all the way up the business chain, all the way to the leadership positions.
Can I ask, right before we welcomed the two of you to the program, I was promoting on behalf of one of our partners the new iPhone 13. And I know that people get when I got my iPhone, I think I have the 11 Pro Max. Maybe I have the 12. I have no idea what I have. but I get a new phone every 3 or 4 years, and typically there's been a pretty significant upgrade in the capabilities of it, whether that's storage or tech or ease of use or what have you. And it can scan, and I know that this is nothing new, but it can scan my face in lieu of a fingerprint, which was in lieu of a PIN code earlier, and you can now lift the phone to your ear to send voice messages, which I had to learn to disable. And there's all these things going on that the average person may not even realize. I mean, from a layperson's perspective, you know, if I right now talk about toaster ovens with you and I have my phone anywhere near me, I know that when I scroll through my Instagram, and maybe I'm doing this, maybe I'll tweet it or post a photo if this happens later. I've got my phone in my hand right now and I'm talking to you about toaster ovens. I wonder if maybe later when I go into my Instagram, if I'm going to see an ad for toaster ovens. I think we all know that I probably am going to, and that's quite unnerving for me. I'm curious to know how the two of you approach tech, AI, machine learning into your own lives. Like, Ryan, what is your phone setup? Or are you the type of person that the more you know, the less you open up? I mean, how do you approach this with regards to your own personal security and safety?
That's a great question. I mean, so I'm not a Luddite. I use technology. I care a lot about technology. Otherwise, I wouldn't do what I do. And I want to acknowledge that there are incredible uses of technology that are important and life-saving. And I know that, right? And so some of the kinds of models that Amy might have worked on for the government, for example, are capable of saving lives. And a simple example is like how good we're getting after supercomputing in the 70s at predicting the weather. I mean, that's just so important, right? And it's a huge computational process. And I benefit from, you know, things like real-time translation or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so I'm not against it. But what I really am concerned about is precisely what we've been talking about, is the fact that there aren't guardrails. People don't have good mental models of what's going on. Like, Ryan, I would say that it's implausible that a company would listen in on your conversation and advertise that to you later, but it feels like they do. And the reason it feels like they do is because they have other methods of predicting and understanding what's on your mind. And so it creates this deep sense of unease that I have argued in my own scholarship is a form of privacy harm. You know, the fact that you feel observed. And so I'm not against technology. I use it in my own life. I'm frankly, I think it's a marvel. It's a wonder sometimes. But we just don't have the guardrails we ought to.
How about you, Amy? I mean, especially considering the work that you've done for government and the depth of your research and the amount of understanding that you have around this. Same question to you. How do you approach tech in your own life?
Yeah, definitely. Like Ryan, I'm not a Luddite. I love technology. That's how I ended up here. I've worked not just in academic research, but I've worked in tech. And I think that algorithms and tech have the incredible potential to really help users and serve their needs. But we have to recognize at the same time that oftentimes these problems are really complex around privacy, around artificial intelligence. Users don't understand how these technologies work, and they shouldn't have to be able to get a result from them. So we need to start accounting for, what do people understand? How do people interpret whether or not they're being spied on, for example? How do they interpret what the AI model is going to be predicting? We need to understand from their perspective better how they're interpreting these technologies and being able to design around that, so that we're always thinking about what's an individual user's interest and how do we make sure that's being protected, and how do we think about protecting societies and at large when we think about building and making these technologies.
Dr. Amy Winecoff, data researcher at Princeton University's Center for Information Technology Policy. Ryan Calo, a law professor out of the University of Washington, whose affiliations include the Stanford Law School Center for Internet and Society and the Yale Law School Information Society Project. You can learn more about what he's doing at WeRobot2021.com. Enormous thanks to the both of you. I'm just going to say it. We don't play it cool or coy here. We need you back on the show sometime, and I'm already looking forward to that conversation.
We're being glad to come back. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks to you both. You got it. That's a great conversation with Ryan Calo and Amy Winecoff. Little bit, I don't know if it's like unnerving. You know what I do find, Faith, and I wanted to ask that final question with intent. You know, how do you integrate tech into your own life? Because if you find, you know, you've got someone like like Dr. Winecoff, who's worked with the U.S. Air Force to develop machine learning models to predict human behavior. And then you say, how do you approach tech in your own life? And she says, hell no, I don't have an iPhone. There's no way I'd have an iPhone. That's going to make me nervous. But neither of them, they both say, we're not Luddites. We love tech, but you got to be aware of this kind of stuff. And I think it was a great booking on your part, and I think it's an important story to pay attention to. I mean, the whole thing that Facebook curates, not just advertisement, of course, because on that front, I'll be honest, I think it makes sense to have smart advertising. I think it's effective. I think it's beneficial for the consumer, and I think it's beneficial for advertisers to be able to put their product or service in front of the people they want to reach. I mean, that's an obvious statement, right? You run an ad in a print newspaper. Who knows if you're reaching the people you want to reach? You're looking to, hit teens 12 to 18. You're not going to run something in the newspaper classifieds. You want to have smart advertising. And like he said, predicting the weather, when Ryan talked about that, I think that's smart. At the same time, if Facebook is suppressing news coverage of unflattering stories around its founding, I don't think Zuckerberg, he's not the CEO. He's like chairman or something like that, right? Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, I think, is the CEO of Facebook, if I remember correctly. He's not the CEO anymore, but
let me check.
Well, he's like, let's just say Mark Zuckerberg. I don't think he really needs an introduction. But that's a little bit more, I mean, I'm not surprised, Sam, to hear that they're suppressing those stories, because as far as a lot of people are concerned, Facebook has the power to throw elections. And that doesn't certainly mean that it's okay.
I think that, one of the things that flies under the radar when we talk about stories like this is that, like, nothing is actually smart. It feeds off of the data that we give it and then manipulates it and kind of feeds it back to us. I mean, that's effectively what this is. And I think that the other thing is that, when you use a tool like Facebook or Instagram, which I know are the same company, but or Google or YouTube or what have you, like, whenever something's free, you have to ask yourself, how am I paying for this?
Right.
Right.
You are the product.
You are the product. Yes. And so, we have all of these free tools that make our lives easier, but they're harvesting all of your data. And as an individual, you need to decide what level of that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And Sarah, you got a point.
Well, no, I'm just going to say, like, what level am I comfortable with? To Amy's point, that a lot of times we don't even know that I'm being monitored, so that my data is being used to create algorithms.
Yeah.
So I can't make that informed choice.
You're supposed to know. It's probably like buried in the tiny type in the terms
that nobody reads.
That nobody reads. That you just click OK.
You hit accept.
Yeah.
Accept.
And I mean, that's shifty in and of itself, that it's just sort of, again, just kind of hidden under
the radar. But if the company
like
were to be required by whomever the governing body would be, to be required to disclose everything in bold across the top banner, welcome to Facebook, plug in your information so we can sell you. I'm not sure how many people would do it. Some still might. I mean, for some people, I don't think that this is a concern. I see varying degrees of, I think of fellow broadcasters, friends of mine, I won't say by name, doesn't matter, but when they post family photos, public family photos, they put the emojis over their kids' faces. Mm-hmm. They don't want people knowing even what their kids look like, right? It's something we wrestle with. And then you have people that'll be public persons that'll say what school their kid goes to, and I think that's nuts. Mm-hmm. I think it's dangerous because you never know what can happen, but the online world, people have access. I'm saying such obvious. I mean, we just had like a Princeton. Like, am I seriously going to come on? And now, time for my observations. No, but Mark? I think it's important that we have these conversations. These things are on our radar. The fact that yesterday was a friend. It was actually the managing director of our company of Relay Communications that owns Real Talk, and he reached out to me from Vancouver just as a heads up. He says there are some new. If you've updated your iPhone, there are some new settings under Messages. And there's one new setting in particular that if you pick up your phone and put it to your ear, you can send text messages to people, and people are doing it inadvertently, not realizing, is right. And so imagine the messages that are being sent to some people. He says, you got to disable that. I mean, that's just one thing. That's one setting in one application on one phone, but I don't know that we're as educated, generally speaking, as we need to be about how much AI and machine learning integrates. I mean, it's not a bad news story. AI is it's a very exciting new frontier, and amazing things are being done. But I think we just need to be aware of what's being done and how.
I mean, I remember in 1997, is it, when Terminator 2, that's the year that the robots take over. And so that was always my like, oh my gosh, robots, AI, that's what's going to happen. And that's not what the UN is saying. That's not what our guests, they showed that that's not, what's going to end up happening.
Yeah.
But I think looking at the Facebook just notes, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO, Sheryl Sandberg is the COO.
COO, got it.
But really what the concerns are, we talk about there are multiple congressional hearings in the states around Facebook, and they were saying, yes, we see these problems, or sometimes they say we don't see them and we don't know what you're talking about, but they're going to address them. And the Facebook files, the Wall Street Journal piece looked at saying, the whole idea of groups, and they were trying to create a healthier, friendlier platform. And what they've done is they've allowed people to congregate and create an angrier space. They know that Instagram is toxic for many teens, most like trending towards women, female teens. They also know that there's employees are flagging drug cartels and human traffickers. And yet the company's response is weak, is what the document is showing. So
you think of all of the law enforcement implications. I mean, a lot of times, I know that this will be news to nobody, but a lot of times criminals aren't the most intelligent people on the planet. And there have been many instances of people essentially confessing to or committing crimes. I mean, some of them have been horrific. And I'm certainly not making light of it, but on social media, like using live platforms, and fascinating and an ongoing conversation. I saw one real talker chimed in and said, we didn't even really talk about the difference between machine learning and AI, which is a fair observation. That wasn't really the mandate or the point of the conversation, but that's right. We have talked about AI in the show in the past and will continue to do so because there's so many different and cool applications. I'm going to get to a Real Talker's email, one from Michael in just a second, but first wanted to give a shout out to our friends at Kubi Energy. When you're talking about solar, sustainable energy, green energy, net zero, there are so many different applications, and I wanted to direct your attention to their Instagram. They posted this just yesterday. Their friends at Cellar Door Farm. Look at this. I mean, a stunning image of that beautiful solar installation. So many applications, including for agriculture. And Jake Kubisky, the founding CEO at Kubi Energy, told me, he said, we're getting more and more business in ag, in particular because of a recent government initiative that provided a subsidy to get more farms off the grid, or at least in a more sustainable direction. You can learn more at kubienergy.ca. Our friends at Local Waste want to remind you that they've been doing business for more than a quarter century now in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and always looking to grow. If you need a bin, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, what have you, you can look them up online at localwaste.ca. But if you see an opportunity for an entrepreneurial venture in your neck of the woods, you don't see a lot of waste collection, or the companies that are there in your town, village, city center are doing a lousy job with a bad reputation, Local Waste would love to talk to you. This is a company that has set no ceiling on its growth. You can get in touch with Mikkel, Lauren, and Chris online at localwaste.ca, or give them a shout, 780-936-8592. And we also wanted to wrap up today's show with a reminder that the team at Eden Landscaping is getting set to get into their fall and winter assignments. Essentially, obviously, you know how it goes. People doing landscaping and yard work will typically wrap it up in late fall. Well, that's when they ramp up their customer service and collaboration, where they get creative, where they start talking to clients, many of them return customers, about how they can bring an outdoor space to life. If you're the type of person that has a Pinterest board going, or you're the type of person that's ripping pages, colored photographs out of magazines that exactly nail down what you want to do with your backyard, your front yard, or wherever, Mike and his team at Eden Landscaping would love to see that Pinterest board. They'd love to see your magazine clippings, and they'd love to draw up a plan that you could make happen as early as next spring into next summer. You'll find them online at landscapeedmonton.ca. We got an email from Michael just the other day. As a matter of fact, he sent it to us on Sunday. This was after Michael had listened to my interview with Dr. Melanie Thomas a political scientist at the University of Calgary. He said, I just heard the interview and I disagree with her, and you must never have her on your show again. He says, I'm just kidding. I wish that Michael could have seen Sarah Hoyles and Sam Brooks' face. Both of you were like, what the? He says, I'm not a narrow-minded pigeon who can't handle alternative perspectives. But I do take issue, he says, with her read of that John Ibbotson article, and especially her notion that the PPC, the People's Party of Canada, Max Bernier's party, shouldn't be legitimized. He says she talks about how other groups, that aren't finding sort of comfortable political homes within the mainstream or even fringe parties. He says, but the simple answer to that is then start a party. If you succeed in finding critical mass like the PPC did, and Michael wants to clarify, he says, please inform Real Talkers that I didn't vote PPC, then you absolutely deserve to have a shot at putting somebody in Parliament. He says, now I completely disagree with the PPC platform, especially with the sub-platform, and I do agree that if you vote for them, you're either a racist or a misogynist or completely clueless, but the movement has gained traction for a reason. People's anger, however misguided, toward the establishment. That's it. And he says, and who would even be in charge of somehow establishing some sort of policy to curb these political movements? And let's take that notion a step further. I mean, does the government of the day get to pass legislation prohibiting certain types of political parties from existing? He says this is clearly a non-starter for an infinite number of reasons. He says, no, I don't have all the answers. But in this case, I believe it's up to society to demand better education so that people don't grow up believing lies like immigrants are to blame for their own economic status. He says, I believe, as Kaylin Robertson pointed out on your show, Ryan, last week, that as a society, we must address these issues within families or friendships and allow people that we care about not to fall prey, not to feel isolated, therefore vulnerable to being misled. Now, is it a perfect solution? Of course not, he says, but I don't see a better option. He says, now I'm a cis, hetero, white, upper middle class, privileged up the wazoo kind of a guy. So I want to approach the tweets that you read, Ryan, from Bashir Muhammad and his criticism of the article cautiously, but I don't believe that what Ibbotson wrote in that op-ed is in any way legitimizing racism. It's reporting on something that occurs today, and that is that racism still exists. He's not promoting racism. He's not calling anyone to arms, but he is reporting facts. And the movement is absolutely in part motivated by the increasing number of non-European immigrants. Is this despicable? Unquestionably. Is it motivating them? Unfortunately, yes. He says, I also found it somewhat annoying that Professor Thomas was somewhat dismissive of Kaylin Robertson's lived experience by writing it off as approaching PPCers and the rest as if they're saying, pretty please don't make us feel badly. That's not what he was saying at all. He was saying that love and care for these people, but still lovingly despise and disagree with what they are putting out there. And he is an authority on the subject because of that transition that he's undergone. Michael says, whether you read this or not, thanks for letting me have my say. To you three, keep fighting the good fight. That from Michael. That's a great email. I love that. Whether you read it or not, says Michael, thank you for allowing me to have my say. You always have a say on this show. You can be in touch with us anytime. We read all the emails to talk@ryanjesperson.com. And of course, you can hit us up on Twitter anytime. Thanks for what is it about now? I think about 2,300 or so, 2,200 or so that are following our brand new Twitter account @RealTalkRJ. We'd love to get that number bumped up. It's the official account for the show. And of course, those tweets are from our editorial producer, Sarah Hoyles. You can find more online at ryanjesperson.com. A reminder that tomorrow is the last show of our week, and that means we're going to have an opportunity to eat your words and fire out trash talk on the same half hour. As a matter of fact, to save my voice, I think we might need to split them up a little bit. A great show in store, and I'll tell you what, we're going to play our cards close to our chest right now on who we're talking to because we don't know what's going to happen this afternoon. But like you, we'll be keeping a keen eye on it. Thanks, Real Talkers. We'll see you soon.